Glory to Jesus Christ. Father Jason Sharon here. I just received this newsletter from LifeSiteNews giving a report of their activities over the past year soliciting donations. Well, in response to that, I'm going to have a guest here. And the guest here is Ukraine. The hundreds of thousands of people who've died in Ukraine. Let this chair represent them. And let this little toy, which belonged to a child in an apartment building outside of Kiev, which was leveled by a Russian missile, I was able to get that little toy, and I use it to remind people about the truth and horror of this war. And so I want to speak to John Henry Weston, and I want to speak to Steve Jalcevic from LifeSiteNews. And here, they are so tone deaf. These are people who purport to follow our blessed Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. These are people who purport to be pro-family. These are people who purport to be pro-life. And yet, when they send this out, what could be more tone deaf than this? They have here this cathedral, St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, on the cover of their solicitation for funds. Shame on you, John Henry. Shame on you, Steve Jalcevic. You know, this is unconscionable. Christ speaks about people like you. And he says, woe to you scribes and you Pharisees, you hypocrites. You are whitewashed tombs. You know, outwardly you appear so beautiful and pious. But within, John Henry and Steve, you are filled with the stench of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. Outwardly, you appear pious and righteous Catholics, but within, you are filled with hypocrisy. How dare you, with the hundreds of thousands of people, well, actually, it's over that. Some people put it up to now over 1.5 million, if you include the poor Russian soldiers who've been forced into the meat grinder by Vladimir Putin. But speaking about on the Ukrainian side, the hundreds of thousands of people who have died unnecessarily for an unnecessary, unjust war. And it is a war that is genocidal. People who have studied genocides look at the pattern and the rhetoric coming out of Moscow and their actions in the lands that they have conquered. And what has happened fulfills the definition of genocide. You know, we can talk about all kinds of things. The language about having to remove this whole class of people, about de-ethnicizing a whole section of planet Earth. And they still, during the middle of this, they go out and they use the cultural capital of this with the blasphemous Christ is King imposed over top of it. I mean, think about this during, let's say, World War II with the death camps of what the Nazis were doing in Dachau and Auschwitz and so many other places. And then some Catholic organization were to go and use a backdrop of Berlin and how beautiful and pro-family, the Nazi regime is. It would be absurd. And then if they put Christ's name over top, superimpose it over top of it, the outrage would be even more compounded. This is no less. This is no less. You can just look at, let's put aside for a brief moment the hundreds of thousands of people who've died unnecessarily in this. Let's look at how, at the beginning of this war, they treated those poor men in Mariupol, and how they sieged that city. And they trapped not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of people without food, without water, without heat, without medical care. All those civilians who died. There was no need for it. None of that, what happened in Mariupol, fulfilled the conditions for a just war, much less against all of those civilians, entrapping hundreds of thousands of them in there while you rain down artillery upon their residential buildings? How about, I went to Bucha. How about the summary executions and the massacres there? What about the rapes and the sexual violence? And this is from a pro-life, pro-family government? This is blasphemous. And then we have their mouthpieces here in the West who are giving a bad, demonic name to the pro-life, pro-family movement by putting a Russian cover on it. And what about if John Henry and Stephen, if you are so pro-family, and if your organization is so pro-family, then give me an explanation for the 20,000 plus children who've been abducted by Vladimir Putin's bloody regime and taken into Russia and are held in captivity there, forced to be re-educated. Why don't you talk about that? Why don't you stinking Pharisees talk about the plight of Catholics in these areas? You don't dare talk about that because Big Daddy Vladimir Putin, whom you have a crush on, doesn't want you to talk about it. But what about all those Catholics? There are none there. They've had to flee. There isn't one Catholic church in all of these areas that the Russians have taken over. The Catholic convents, the Catholic monasteries, the Catholic parishes, the Catholic schools, the Catholic chanceries, all of that has been abolished. And you say they're pro-family? They're pro-faith? No. You are working for your father, the devil, by giving him pious cover for his impiety. What about, I've spoken to people who were tortured. What about these people? Are you saying that Russia is pro-family and pro-life? Look at the way it treats the Ukrainians who are captured by them. And there are things that the Russians do to these people that I cannot speak of on social media. And you say nothing about this, obviously. None of that happens to the Russians who are captured and become POWs on the Ukrainian side. That doesn't happen to them. They are treated humanely. So, and what about the filtration of all these civilians who had to go through these filtration camps? And the consistent attack during winter on the energy sector that the civilian population depends upon. If it's during war and you're going to attack, a bunker, that's fair game. It's war. But to attack civilian structures repeatedly, week after week, year after year, and especially the energy grid during winter is especially evil. And yet, John Henry, you're saying this is the culture that's life? If that's the kind of life you're advocating for, John Henry and Steve, I don't want anything to do with it. You are giving a bad name to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you're going to have to answer for every word before him when you come to that last and dread judgment before his glorious throne. You whitewashed tombs. May God have mercy on you. And here's what I think of LifeSite News.